Our story begins with the old Housatonic Rail Road, chartered in 1836 to build from Bridgeport to the Massachusetts state line. Service to New Milford commenced on February 19, 1840, and to the state line on December 1, 1842. It was merged into the New Haven Railroad in 1892, with passenger service maintained continuously on the northern portion of the original Housatonics route, that is above Brookfield Junction, until the advent of Amtrak on May 1, 1971. The last passenger run was Train 142, an ex-New York Central RDC number 78, on April 30, 1971. Conductor and engineer Nick LaCava and Pete McLaughlin ran live to Pittsfield and then deadheaded back to Danbury. Freight service was discontinued soon after. The section abandoned was identified as USRA Line 60, defined as part of the New Milford secondary track, New Milford Milepost 13.2 to Canaan Milepost 47.5, a distance of 34.3 miles. The application for abandonment indicates that U.S. Gypsum in Falls Village went out of business in December 1971, resulting in a loss of 85% of the line's traffic. Prior car loadings for 1970 were 489 cars and 499 in 1971, for a deficit of $81,000 in 1970 and $60,000 in 1971. Future operations were projected to require $477,000 in repair to restore the route, plus an estimated $45,000 in annual maintenance. Abandonment would eliminate the maintenance and liability of 22 public and 28 private grade crossings. False start. The Berkshire Railroad Company Incorporated, with offices in New Milford. A bill was submitted to the Connecticut legislature in 1973, and this formal application was received by the PUC on March 13, 1975. The application included traffic projections, department budgets, planned freight service, plus steam service from New Milford to Gaylordsville daily and to Kent on weekends and holidays. This effort was evidently unsuccessful, as the route lay fallow for nearly another decade. In the interim, we fast forward 6 years to a road trip. In November 1981, a group of NRHS WestCon chapter members, including myself, Ad Austin, and Mia Mather, trailered Ad's Toyota railcar conversion to Merwinsville for a trip up the abandoned and isolated line. The faded red Corolla is labeled Narragansett Pier MC30, and is not a high rail, but permanently equipped with flanged rail wheels. As Ad worked to align the trailer with the rails, up pulls a red Ford pickup trailing a genuine railroad speeder, and out steps a uniformed man. Patches, hat, the whole deal. Looks like we're in trouble. As they approached, it turns out that the uniform is that of a Boy Scoutmaster, and they're as surprised as we are. After introductions, Paul Kerber unloads his ex-New York Central speeder, and we proceed south to the literal end of track, where positive separation has been achieved by the removal of 2 lengths of rail. After inspecting the break, we headed back to our train and proceeded north. Portions of the line had been cleared of brush for occasional operation of the Merwinsville Flasher, an interesting critter to say the least. We stopped briefly at Kent and continued to West Cornwall, where we found, for all practical purposes, the northern end of track. After jacking and turning MC30 to face the radiator in the direction of travel, we ran express back to Merwinsville. We concluded our excursion at Merwinsville where it began, and I thought no more of the line until my friend and fellow private car owner Roger Clements confided in me during a 1982 Aprico excursion to Bay Head, New Jersey, aboard Dick Horstman's business car, Lehigh Valley 353. Roger outlined a plan to restore service north of New Milford, and I was intrigued but skeptical. It took a while, but I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when, on Thanksgiving weekend 1983, Roger called to ask if I'd like to help finish painting the new Housatonic Railroad's first piece of rolling stock, an ex-Navy 45-ton GE switcher. When I arrived at the Remington Arms Complex in downtown Bridgeport, I was introduced to Roger's partner, John J. Hanlon, who had just finished the superstructure in dark green. Unmasking, glass replacement, handrail, and underframe paint remained, so we set to work. Roger is shown painting a main reservoir. Jay reinstalled the K14 brake stand, and I masked and painted a set of chevrons. Measurements were taken, and on our return visit, new footboards were fabricated and applied. The original Remington logo was left on the cab side for the dedication ceremony. The ceremony took place at the Remington plant on December 12, 1983, where Roger and Jay received the deed for GE Builder number 15157 from plant manager A.J. Hermendorfer. Roger, as president, along with VPs Jay Hanlon and James Callahan, had been busy since we last talked on the Bayhead trip, conducting the necessary research to generate a 180-page proposal to operate the dormant line. Following leads provided by Northwest Connecticut Regional Planning and other agencies, they had researched possible sources of revenue, including tourism, online freight, and solid waste removal. Solid waste traffic, which had totaled 9,003 tons in the Kent, Canaan, Sharon area in 1970, was expected to more than triple to 28,000 tons by the year 2000. Municipal waste as a source of revenue would eventually prove to be a good bet. However, that traffic would not be realized until after the road's acquisition of the Danbury area trackage from Conrail in 1992. The Housatonic execs had created surveys and mapped online station areas to submit a proposal, and finally secured the rights to operate USRA Section 60. Below is Roger's artwork for the survey of Cornwall Bridge Station and surrounding area. With the first piece of rolling stock in hand, attention turned to the right-of-way. As shown in earlier photos from the MC30 trip, nature had taken a firm hold on most of the physical plant. Passage on that trip was largely due to the efforts of the flashers operators and other speeder owners, and as we would discover, even the minimal clearance required to pass a speeder took effort to secure, only to disappear again each growing season. Pictured is Jay, in May 1984, contemplating a mile of overgrown tangent just north of milepost 45, Maltby's Siding, or U.S. Gypsum. The crew has cut roughly a car's width of the right-of-way, which included not only vegetation encroaching from the sides, but saplings up to 2 inches in diameter growing between the rails. While we cleared track on the weekends, the 45-tonner was finally on the move to Canaan. Side rods were removed, and Conrail 9375 made the pickup from Remington, just barely observing the 25-mile-per-hour restriction imposed by the locomotive's double-reduction traction motor gearing. The 45 first made a stop in the New Haven wheel shop for a fresh contour. The Stanray wheel lathe reprofiles a complete wheel set without removing it from the car, eliminating the need for drop tables and hoists as used in other wheel shops. The car locomotive is rolled into place, the bearing box covers are removed, and the lathe centers engage the axles. The operator retracts the sliding rail section, pictured just above the revolving cutter head, which then rises to reprofile the tread as the wheel is slowly rotated. From New Haven, the little GE went to Selkirk via Springfield, and then was delivered to Canaan. Note the blanked headlight. During transport, we removed the large glass golden glow reflectors, plus the bronze bell, which hung under the frame and was a prime target for collectors. Even after the arrival in Canaan, we would install and remove the bell and whistle with each operating session. We had been clearing brush with the aid of Jay's high-rail Bronco, but with the arrival of the 45, we could now cut the required clearance from a taller, safer platform. Early 1984 fell into a familiar pattern. Because we tied up on the vestigial CNE line running east-west at Canaan Union Station, we were a little under 1 mile above our northern end of track, USRA Section 60 officially ending at milepost 47.5. The Boston and Maine controlled the Berkshire Maine to the north, and also operated to a point just south of milepost 47.2, far enough to create a tail track below their southernmost industry on the line, Becton Dickinson, a medical manufacturing company which consumed covered hoppers of plastic pellets. This resulted in overlapping operations, as B&D was located 0.3 miles into our territory. So, an unwritten trackage rights agreement existed. On days we planned to operate, we would first call the B&M dispatcher and Billerica to secure permission to occupy the main. Then, from our engine terminal west of the Diamond on the CNE, we would run up the North Y and south past the station. At that time, the south leg of the Y was light rail in very poor shape, so we restricted our moves on that track to speeders and occasionally putting a car in the clear just past the switch. Out on the line, clearing methods varied by location, ranging from steel blade weed whacker to loppers, bow saws, machetes, and ultimately the full chainsaw treatment. Immediately south of the Becton-Dickinson switch, clearances deteriorated to what we called the Tunnel of Love, where hanging branches had been cleared only enough to allow passage of the speeders which formerly toured the line. The first quarter mile required heavy chainsaw work, but then yielded to the relatively light brush of the curve at Julian's farm. Different areas called for different methods. Generally, loppers would squeak the engine by, but we'd have to make a second pass later to clear a car, and eventually cut a proper 20-foot clearance. Though we later operated passenger trains during the warmer months, reclaiming track from Mother Nature never really stopped. Here, Jim Kennedy, a volunteer brakeman from nearby New Milford, and Al Whalen, at the time a Metro-North towerman, clear one of the classic New Haven rail rack mileposts used on the line. Beginning in late fall, through winter and early spring, we made the most of the leaf-free seasons. From left, Mike Donorama, Jay Hanlon, and Janet Courts bust brush near milepost 40 along the river road between Lime Rock and West Cornwall in January of 1985. Power that day was the government surplus 80-ton GE, more about which later. The initial push, however, took place during the spring and early summer of '84, in an effort to open enough track for an excursion of decent length. One request for volunteers to augment our small group resulted in a work party provided by the Army Corps of Engineers. Our association with Fairfield University resulted in a hands-on session for some students of transportation. The operating railroad is, as required by law, a for-profit entity, but Housatonic Brass had created the non-profit Housatonic Railroad Historical and Technical Society, which allied with Fairfield U in a plan to offer various courses and seminars. Pictured are visiting FU students plus Jim Callahan and Roger, at far right on the 45, and yours truly in the weeds. Mike Donorama, leftmost on the platform, became an active volunteer on the Housatonic and later went on to a career with Connecticut DOT. As we progressed south, inspection of the track revealed severely deteriorated ties on wooden cattle crossing number 77.68, just south of the Hollenbeck River. Jay arranged with a local sawmill for delivery to Canaan of replacement timbers. Unfortunately, at that time we had no equipment other than the 45 to transport them, but volunteer Tom Derwin, at left, came to the rescue with his speeder and work cart. Western Maryland 336 made quick work of the 4-mile trip to the site, Roger and Tom riding in comfort, while Jay and I held down the load. The punky condition of the old timbers is evident in this view. After jacking the rail, new oak was eased onto freshly treated stringers. Tom, Roger, and Jay paused before spiking and cleanup. At the end of the day, we backed up a few hundred feet to turn Tom's speeder at the Point of Rocks crossing for the trip home. All of this effort was for the purpose of operating excursions, so as the track work approached the dam at Falls Village, we planned an opening day excursion for July 28, 1984. Though we didn't have any coaches, an arrangement was made with Berkshire Scenic Railroad to our north, and they shipped one of their ex-Lackawanna MU trailers for the event. A number of local dignitaries turned out, plus at least one prominent national figure. Our opening coincided with Canaan's annual Railroad Days festival, and people turned out in numbers to buy tickets for the first official excursion from Canaan to Maltby's, a 7-mile round trip. B&M, however, after allowing our work trains south for the past several months, suddenly decided to stand on an insurance technicality and refused us permission to run. We stalled our passengers while Jay and Roger pled our case. When it became apparent that Billerica was not going to let us run, we put the consist away and spent the rest of the afternoon discussing the road's potential with interested visitors. Pictured at the Housatonic kiosk are VP Jim Callahan, Jay's mother with her back to the camera, and guest engineer Pete McLaughlin. When we did commence tourist operations, Jay's parents became our back office, handling ticket sales and administrative chores and freeing the rest of us for crew service. While we made steady progress from Canaan, there were other worries to the south. The spring of 1984 was exceptionally wet, and our line did not escape damage by the swollen rivers. Here, the Hollenbeck menaces Bridge 77.86, immediately south of Sand Road. Approximately a half-mile south of Lime Rock Station, on the outside of a sharp bend in the river, the line traverses Hard Cider Curve. High water undermined the embankment to the point where the entire top layer of soil and trees slipped, causing the 30-inch vertical drop shown. Here, Jay reviews the scene with representatives from the Army Corps of Engineers, to whom we had turned for help rebuilding the damaged right-of-way. With no way to repair the washout by ourselves, as well as no passenger stock of our own, we devised other means of providing limited service. At our request, B&M had recently sent a flat car for MOW use, and Russ Gibbard, one of our volunteers, conceived an October rail hayride outing for a group he belonged to. An energetic and resourceful individual, Russ soon had the flat fitted with railings made of 4x4s and rope. Jay, Mike, and Joe Jacobs work in the foreground as Russ and a helper complete steps for boarding the flat. All that was needed were hay bales for seating, but unfortunately his group's arrangements fell through and the excursion was canceled. On the plus side, we now had a stable and relatively safe platform from which to continue our clearing. We still had no proper passenger stock, however. It was during this time that the fleet of ex-Lackawanna MUs and trailers were on the surplus market, and these cars seemed ideal in appearance and capacity. Unfortunately, though Berkshire Scenic managed to secure several of these cars, this effort did not bear fruit for the Housatonic. In the fall of 1984, after negotiations with CDOT, we visited a storage yard in the depths of Grand Central Terminal to pick out surplus coaches, selecting the 6 ex-SEPTA, nay Reading, cars which had recently been in service on the Danbury and Hudson lines. The coaches were cycled through Harmon for fresh air dates and arrived in Canaan via Selkirk and the B&M shortly thereafter. Also in October, Jay, a veteran government surplus shopper, obtained what would become our workhorse, a 500 horsepower 80-ton GE center cab which at last switched the Pentagon powerhouse. Remington's little 45 put us on the map and had served well during the early phases of our clearing, but it was not well suited to excursion service. Double reduction gearing and loose, clanking side rods suggested speeds no higher than 10 miles per hour or so, plus only one of the two 150 horsepower Cummins prime movers was operable, severely limiting its capacity. HRR 500 joined HRR 300, which was the 45, on our roster, both numbered for horsepower, as is the practice on some roads. It immediately received the full Housatonic image applied by Jay, and with the 45, bracketed a coach on a single-car pull-pull consist for the excursions to Falls Village. We were finally in business. During that winter, we also took delivery of PC 28202, a 6-axle heavyweight that the Pensy had converted to a traveling air brake instruction classroom. The intent was to convert this piece to a dining car for first-class service. Before we could accomplish that, however, it would be necessary to clear the interior of complete sets of actual brake equipment, cylinders, reservoirs, piping, and valves used for demonstrating the various air brake schedules to trainees. Jay and Russ are well along with the demo phase of the project. As noted, railroading was a 12-month outdoors affair for us. Here, we see Jay and Mike wading through the snow just below Flanders near milepost 23. The break-apart cart is stocked with chainsaws and supplies, and soon will resume brush busting just above Kent Center. That February, we decided to spend a day inside for first aid class. Volunteer Chuck Wojak, whose personal ride was a decommissioned ambulance, conducted basic first aid training for our crew. After tending to all manner of injuries, the survivors posed for a group shot. In the front row were Janet, Joe London, and Paul, and standing are Russ, Lou Beers, Rick Stover, myself, and Jay. Probably the most significant arrival in 1985 was HRRX 9001, a 30-yard Diffco dump car. With this, we could finally repair the washouts at Hardsider Curve and locations south, and extend our operations to West Cornwall, Cornwall Bridge, and ultimately to Kent. We ran a shuttle operation from Red Wing Limestone Plant at the south end of Maltby's, 4.5 miles to the curve, to dump and return. 43 carloads of limestone and tailings make the fill look like a Caribbean beach, but we now had use of our right-of-way. Note the sharp bend of the Housatonic River at left, which was the source of the scouring that led to the slide. As seen before, clearing the line consisted not only of dealing with thousands of encroaching bushes, but also overhanging branches as well as new saplings growing within the clearances. Larger railroads had mechanized this process, but we could only afford weed whackers and chainsaws. For the areas fouled by small bushes, we leased a ballast regulator, which had a rotating brush in the front consisting of old air hoses. This was only partially successful and didn't address the overhanging limbs, so we looked for a high-rail brush cutter, the type with two hydraulically controlled flail heads that leave the cleared right-of-way looking like a war zone. Shown is the machine leased from Vermont Railway. The flail made great progress in the more heavily wooded areas north of Lime Rock, but once past the washout, we entered a relatively easy stretch on the river road to West Cornwall. Below was taken just north of West Cornwall, which we reached in late January. Clearing continued south until Cornwall Bridge and finally Bell Spring Siding were reached. 1985 also brought a 15-ton gasoline-powered Bay City crane, donated by Housatonic supporter Jack Raymond of Jay's native Fairfield. After retrieving the beast from his plating business, we persuaded it to mount the B&M flat, where it sits with a few lengths of rail plus a clamshell bucket, visible under the boom. And we were now fielding a respectable work train. With the start of tourist operations in late 1984, we began receiving coverage in the local papers. Here, Mike and I prepare for a pre-departure message from Russ, as recorded in the Sunday Danbury News Times. The novelty of our enterprise even rated a small article in the New York Times. Business started to pick up. 1985 was the first full year of regular operations to West Cornwall. And by then, we had assembled a hardcore group of regular volunteers. Seen below, enjoying a moment before train time, are Al, Lou, Paul, and Russ. The hard hat behind Paul is on today's flagman, Dave Strickus. This, and the next few, are from a series of 4 professionally produced postcards sold in the Housatonic ticket office. Operations were governed by our first employee timetable. On weekends, train number 1 and 2 departed Canaan at 10:30 and 2:30, passed Falls Village and the Regional High School, rounded Hardsider Curve at Lime Rock, and then followed the river road to arrive at West Cornwall 1 hour, 10 minutes later. Passengers then detrained with about an hour to explore the restaurants and shops, while we ran to Cornwall Bridge and Bell Springs siding immediately south to turn the train for the climb back to West Cornwall. Probably reflecting the nature of our passengers, sightseers, not fans, we rarely had riders south of West Cornwall. Also, that leg ran almost entirely through the woods rather than riverside, and so had less scenic appeal. Having the runaround at Bell Springs freed us from push-pull operations with the 45. Because of the line's profile, the little GE was able to lead southbound, having enough power to start 3 cars for the mostly downhill run. However, regardless of location in the consist, it would generally function as a cab car, controlling the bell, whistle, and brakes, while the 80 on the other end did all the work. Wear and tear on the side rods was always a concern, so it would be dropped after leading to West Cornwall, then slowly returned light. For that, and other reasons, we seldom ran it in revenue service after Bell Springs became available. Proving that there is always an exception, here is a fairly rare arrangement with the 45 leading northbound. Total elapsed time for the Canaan to Bell Springs round trip was 3 hours 12 minutes. Reflecting the fact that patronage was low during the summer months but peaked with the fall foliage, the 1986 timetable listed the early train as running only during Canaan Railroad days and the leaf season. Another addition to the schedules was our planned service from Kent, consisting of alternate trains from Kent to Woodrow, a 1 hour 2 minute round trip, and then Kent to Kent Falls, a 42-minute round trip. The consist would be the 45 plus 1 or 2 coaches, push-pull. Kent has always been a popular tourist destination. Plus, since the 3-hour Canaan trains were proving a little long for those with short attention spans, it was felt that quick runs, rather than scheduling a Kent-Cornwall Bridge round trip, would be more popular. Other timetables, which were considered but never got farther than the string charts, had trains originating out of West Cornwall for simultaneous 2-hour 20-minute round trips to Kent and Canaan, or schedules which, via connecting trains at Cornwall Bridge, would allow a Canaan to Kent full system round trip for those hardcore fans ready for a 7-hour 35-minute odyssey, which included 1 hour 35 each way for sightseeing in West Cornwall and 1 hour 15 in Kent. Gentle use of the 45 in the flatter river valley around Kent would have allowed a second consist based in that area, but we hadn't finished opening the line south of Bell Springs, and there were some track kinks and minor washouts from 1984 yet to be fixed. As specified in the employee timetable, one factor significant to our operations was the necessity to stop and protect, or flag, every crossing, as we had no protection at any of the 9 public crossings on our portion of the route. Normally, this involved the head brakeman swinging down at the edge of the road, stopping traffic if necessary, then reboarding as the power started across. This was the standard practice for all work trains, but for scheduled passenger ops, in order to reduce time as well as wear and tear on the equipment and passengers, we used a mobile flagman who would arrive at the crossing ahead of the train, flag us by unstopped, and then drive to the next crossing. Here, Jim flags Dublin Road at the Falls Village Dam on a half-mile stretch of 0.73% grade, which was the place we least liked to start a 5-car train with the 80-ton GE. Point of Rocks, which is Sand Road and Route 126, the Dam, Lime Rock, are 5 crossings on the River Road, plus Route 128 in West Cornwall. Each was allowed 2 minutes in the timetable, totaling 18 minutes saved each way. Specials and charters provided an occasional break in our routine. On July 25, 1985, we ran a train for the local Chamber of Commerce. Jay, at left in the brown suit, works the crowd. For the occasion, there was music at the station and refreshments on board. The conversations moved from the platform to the cars, and we took a leisurely trip to Cornwall Bridge. One of the most rewarding things about working on the Housatonic was the universally positive attitude everyone seemed to have toward the trains, in the towns, at the crossings, and in the backyards we passed. Though a civilian, and not in any way affiliated with the railroad, our caterer here spontaneously proves that deep down, everyone is a rail fan. Aside from the occasional midwinter late arrival, we didn't have much reason to use our headlights for anything other than visibility at grade crossings. Both GEs were equipped with heavy glass golden glow headlight reflectors, which produce a much more atmospheric light than do the high-intensity sealed beams used in modern power. Here, we've just tied up after a work party in January 1985, and the moon is rising over Canaan Union Station. That summer we did have one fairly unique night run, a charter by a church group for transportation to a sunrise service on the river. It was an approximate 3 a.m. report time at Canaan, where we spotted the consist and boarded passengers for the 8-mile shove to the site. The group disembarked at a path and disappeared toward the river while we waited for the trip home. While checking the coaches, Al surprised 2 young parishioners celebrating the sunrise in their own private way, but he knew what happens on the Housatonic stays on the Housatonic, and shooed them off to join their friends, making no comment to the elders. A noteworthy movement was the November 9th Housatonic Valley Special excursion, chartered by the Mass Bay RRE, involving Housatonic in a joint operation with the Berkshire Scenic Railroad, our competition to the north. Here, Berkshire engineer Rick Silva in SW8 number 8619 leads the consist around the north leg of the Y. The train will soon shove south to a joint with our 80-tonner plus 4 coaches, creating a double-ended 8-car train. Trailing the ex-Conrail EMD is Berkshire Scenic 19, another 80-ton GE, in a New Haven-inspired paint scheme. The RRE passengers arrived with the Berkshire train, and as additional riders board the Housatonic cars, Rick and Jay confer with Berkshire President John Herbert, behind Jay. R80 is leading the longest train to traverse the line since it was abandoned. 8 cars and 3 locomotives pause on Hardside Curve for a brief scenic stop, a standard feature of our excursion operations. Before completing the runaround at Bell Springs, I exercised engineer's prerogative and took a moment to spot the power for photos, including one of our WestCon chapter national director, the late John Flower, ever-present cup of mud in hand. The remainder of the trip back to Canaan is run with our GE again leading. Al, who is by now our superintendent and directing the move while on Housatonic rails, was pulling hard with the SW8, this being a true triple-header due to the lack of MU on any of the power. The 80 could handle all 6 of our Reading coaches, but the throttle was basically wide open all the way from Bell Springs to West Cornwall and again from Lime Rock to Falls Village, and 8 cars would be asking a little too much. With the excursion operations pretty much on autopilot, Jay turned again to mechanical improvements. The railroad had acquired New Haven 60521, a 40-foot drop-bottom gon built at the road shops in 1937, and also a surplus V-plow, which he combined to create a snowplow seemingly the equal of any storm short of the blizzard of 1888. We see a detail shot of the plow. We also acquired this RPO, Expensi 6563, another refugee from Cedar Hill Dead Storage. It was briefly considered for conversion to the offices and station at Kent, but the project never got off the ground, and the car was eventually donated to the Danbury Railway Museum, where it has been beautifully restored inside and out. Through the dead of winter, we continued to repair minor washouts south of our operating area in preparation for service to Kent. The drill was the same: limestone tailings shuttled to the site, dumped, and graded. However, one day the Diffco car was loaded and then sat overnight before the crew headed south for the first trip. Unfortunately, that's all it took to freeze the load to the body, so when the car was dumped, instead of the load sliding out as loose material, the frozen mass tipped the dump body over center with the results shown here. Fortunately, the cold allowed us access to the site, approximately a half-mile from Route 7 over frozen fields that would be impassable by the necessary equipment come spring. So, on January 16, 1986, began the Great Dump Car Rescue. Jay contracted with industrial riggers, and 2 cranes plus a D8 bulldozer descended the hill to the site. The car was rigged and lifted clear of the bank to a position directly over the track. The load was re-rigged, and the D8 then winched the car body 90 degrees to horizontal, ready to retruck. In late 1985, we were again on the prowl for new power. Al and I took a trip that November to Naparano Iron and Metal in New Jersey, that famous last stop for old locomotives. There we inspected chassis number 7304, an SD-18, but decided that wasn't really what we were looking for. On the 3rd of the following April, Jay and I flew with Rick Stover to Altoona in Rick's private plane, where we had an appointment with the Conrail Mechanical Department. They had printed maintenance histories for several candidates and gave us a tour of the deadline, and after checking wheel sets and opening countless hood and electrical cabinet doors, we selected RS3M number 9935. Originally Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 910, it was retired by Conrail in 1976, and later outshopped as an RS3M, one of many Alco road switchers repowered by 12-cylinder EMD 567s removed from E-units. 9935's 1200 horsepower would provide ample power for our purposes, giving us a locomotive that wasn't running flat out for most of the northbound trip. In April of 1986, the coaches received a long overdue interior cleaning with fresh paint and power-washed seats. An improvised paint shop was established at Maltby's, and the entire fleet of 6 coaches, plus our Pensy B60 baggage car, were thoroughly prepped and painted in the new Housatonic image. There were not only acres of car sides to blast, but there was plenty of detail, too. Before and after. The results speak for themselves. The cars lack only lettering as they bask in the sun by the golf course. For the 1986 season, we published a mailable, bifold timetable with route map, schedules, and fares, including, optimistically, the trains north and south out of Kent. Unfortunately, significant track work remained between Bell Springs and Kent, and the start of that service would always remain TBA. In July of 1986, noting that operations had settled into a groove and that the beginnings of a paid staff seemed to have most of the challenges well in hand, I pulled the pin and went back to a project that I had neglected for nearly 3 years, that being my family. I came back periodically to shoot trains, but it was no longer an every weekend trek up Route 7. From time to time, I'd bring one or the other of my daughters along for a little taste of the sounds and sensations, but you know how that often goes. No new rail fans in my family, but certainly not for lack of exposure. In 1992, 100 years after the original Housatonic was absorbed by the Consolidated, a 3-way deal between the railroad, the state of Connecticut, and the town of Danbury resulted in the new Housatonic vacating Danbury Yard. Here, Jeep 35s bracket the RS-3M on the move that emptied the yard. The unused yard became the home of the Danbury Railway Museum. Permission was granted to use the state-owned Reading coaches, and at the last minute, the Plougon came along for the ride when the Housatonic delivered 5 of the 6 coaches to the DRM in April of 1985. This hospital move started like a sunny photographer's special, but ran into a full-fledged squall as we progressed south. Housatonic freight operations have much to offer the railfan. Here, the Still River, northbound along River Road above West Cornwall, near the tunnels at Hollyville, Vale Road, Stony Hill Road, Stearns Siding at Sandcut Road, South Kent Road above Hatch Pond, tight quarters at Cornwall Bridge, and wide open spaces at Julian's Farm. Currituck Road, George's Hill, Hollyville, New Milford, Farrell Road, Rocky River, the old mills south of New Milford Center, even Santa's a fan. Freight-only Housatonic has also hosted some very successful excursions, including 2005's Farewell to the FL9, seen here at speed. And Canaan Railroad Days is still alive and well. Railroad Days excursion. In 2009, the Mass Bay RRE again rode the Housatonic, this time all the way to Danbury. 9935 and Berkshire Scenics ex-Conrail SW9 9128 leads 6 coaches past the restored Merwinsville Hotel, where our 1981 excursion began. There's not much left of the early days. As of my last visit, the air brake construction car is gone, as is the 80-ton GE, traded to Conrail toward the Jeep 35s. The Bay City crane rested at Maltby's on the B&M flat car, in the company of the air compressor, while the 45 sat vandalized a few hundred feet south on the siding. So, today's Housatonic is a healthy short line with an encouraging future, but no matter how big or successful it becomes, to me, the road will always conjure visions of hard work and good times in the company of like-minded rail fans. Below, on a sunny day in May 1985, some of the regulars pose at West Cornwall for a group shot. From the left, Russ, Joe, myself, Bill, Lou, Paul, Al, Janet, Mike, and Dave.